Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with residents of Florida bracing for another hurricane. Milton is churning toward the state's west coast. And for the very latest, we are joined by Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Rob, good morning.
Good morning, Nathan. Milton is now a Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico with sustained winds of 160 miles an hour. It's moving towards the northeast at about 14 miles an hour. It's expected to make landfall near the Tampa Bay area tonight around midnight and exit the Florida coast near Cape Canaveral around 1 or 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. It will weaken a bit today, but we still expect the storm to produce a 10 to 15-foot storm surge in the Tampa Bay area late tonight. Also see winds probably in excess of 125 miles an hour in Tampa, and it's still going to be a hurricane as it passes close to the Orlando area overnight and offshore of Cape Canaveral tomorrow.
So when do we expect it all to end then, Rob?
It looks like conditions will improve tomorrow afternoon, Nathan, across much of the state except in northeastern Florida, where they could see hurricane force gusts tomorrow afternoon and into the early evening.
All right, Rob Carolyn with us, our Bloomberg meteorologist. Of course, we're going to be checking back with you for updates throughout the morning, Rob. Thank you.
Well, Nathan, we have another major story that we're following this morning, a possible breakup of tech giant Google. We get the breaking details with the Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Justice Department considering asking a federal judge to force Google to sell off parts of its business. This is an effort to end Google's online search monopoly. In a late court filing Tuesday, prosecutors with the Justice Department said for more than a decade, Google has controlled the most popular distribution channels, leaving rivals with little to no incentive to compete for users. It would be an historic breakup of one of the world's biggest tech companies. The U.S. District Judge in the case, Ahmed Mehta, ruled in August that Google's search engine has been illegally exploiting its dominance. He's outlined a timetable for a trial on the proposed remedies next spring and plans to issue a decision by August. Another option is to order Google to provide access to the underlying data it uses to build its search results and artificial intelligence products. Google has already said it plans to appeal. Experts say that appeals process could take as long as 5 years. Shares of Google parent Alphabet, they are down 1.3% in pre-market trading. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. We're also watching shares of Boeing this morning. They're down about 1.5%. The plane maker has withdrawn its latest contract offer to its union to try to end a nearly month-long strike. Both Boeing and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers blame each other for the impasse. S&P Global Ratings is warning it may cut Boeing's credit grade to junk as the work stoppage that is hammering cash shows no sign of ending.
Let's turn to politics now, Nathan. And Vice President Kamala Harris is seizing on claims that Donald Trump sent Vladimir Putin COVID test kits. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
The claim in Bob Woodward's book says this was at the height of the pandemic. Harris told Howard Stern this is just the most recent, stark example of who Donald Trump is. She said people were scrambling to get these kits, and Trump is sending them to a murderous dictator for his personal use. Trump's campaign has responded that none of these made-up stories are true and says Woodward had no access to them for the book. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. This morning, the Kremlin has confirmed Trump sent Putin COVID testing kits at the height of the pandemic, as recounted in Bob Woodward's book.
Well, Nathan, now to the latest from the Middle East. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has postponed a trip to Washington that was set for today. A source tells Bloomberg it's due to last-minute objections from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We get more from Bloomberg Middle East breaking news editor Dana Craich.
The trip was scheduled for Gallant to go to the U.S. and discuss with U.S. officials the response to Iran's missile attack last week. This was supposed to be very significant and very important, so we actually carved the path towards what we can expect in the region. Is it an escalation, or is it more, reducing these tensions and calming things with the Lebanon situations flaring?
Bloomberg's Dana Craich reports Netanyahu didn't want Gallant to go before his war cabinet agrees to an Iran plan first. An Israeli official says Netanyahu also wants to speak to President Biden first. That conversation is expected to happen today.
Well, turning to markets now, Karen. Stocks sold off in China, falling more than 7%. Chinese equities were down even more, but they pared losses on word China's finance minister will deliver a briefing on fiscal policy on Saturday.
Well, here in the U.S., Nathan, more Fed officials are speaking out about the future of monetary policy. Boston President Susan Collins says policymakers should focus on incoming data to help preserve the strength of the economy.
Looking ahead, preserving the current favorable economic conditions will require adjusting monetary policy so as not to unnecessarily restrain demand. And that will require a careful data-based approach as we balance the risks, and there are risks on both sides.
Boston Fed President Susan Collins says the economy is more vulnerable to shocks now that the labor market is cooling and economic growth is moderating.
And Karen, billionaire investor Ray Dalio tells Bloomberg he does not anticipate the Fed making significant cuts in rates after policymakers slashed the federal funds rate by a 0.5 percentage point.
The economy, by and large, right now itself, is in relatively good balance. So if you look at where growth is, where inflation is, and so on right now, and you have a political year, I think the markets are getting ahead of themselves with expecting that, and I think the risks are more on the upside than the downside.
Bridgewater Associates founder Ray Dalio spoke with Bloomberg's Sonali Basak at the Greenwich Economic Forum. You can hear their full conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. It features the biggest interviews from Bloomberg each day. Find it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, Nathan, speaking of some of the biggest names across Bloomberg, another Wall Street titan is speaking about the economy. We spoke exclusively with J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon about whether a soft landing is possible.
I just think there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things in the future which are inflationary. These, the most important thing taking place is these wars overseas, geopolitics, the terrible humane suffering, but also the a bunch of these countries acting in cahoots against Western interests, against Israel, against Ukraine, against the United States. And that's really serious. So I look at a long amount of serious things. Now, soft landings are hard. I hope it happens. I don't know. I just wouldn't count my eggs in that one.
J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon spoke with Bloomberg's Lisa Abramowitz at the J.P. Morgan Techstars Conference in London.
Finally, Karen, getting into the happiest place on earth now costs more. In California, Disney is raising ticket prices at its Disneyland and California Adventure theme parks by about 6% most days. The least expensive admission, that covers 15 days in January and February, that's going to stay unchanged at $104, but the most expensive weekend and holiday tickets are going up to $206 per day. That change is in effect now.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Karen. The FBI says it arrested an Afghan man who was plotting a terror attack in the U.S. on Election Day, planning to kill Americans on behalf of ISIS. The suspect has been identified as 27-year-old Nasser Ahmad Tahidi of Oklahoma City. A juvenile was also arrested as a co-conspirator. DOJ officials say the investigation intensified after the FBI searched Tahidi's phone and discovered communication with an Afghan ISIS recruiter. 14 states filed a suit against video sharing app TikTok, alleging the effects of its platform are harming the mental health of millions of American children and teenagers. Dr. Darian Sutton told ABC doctors recommend limiting children's screen time.
General recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. For example, children under 2 should have no screen time. Between 2 and 5, no more than 2 hours of screen time that is monitored by an adult. And then above the age of 5, for all of us, no more than 2 hours of screen time.
In a statement, TikTok responded to the lawsuit, saying the company has been trying to work with the attorneys general to find constructive solutions to industry-wide challenges. President Biden announced a final rule requiring drinking water systems nationwide replace lead pipes within 10 years.
Saving hundreds of thousands of mothers and infants from low birth weights and children with lasting brain damage. Protecting more than 1,000 adults from premature death from heart disease every single year because of lead.
Speaking in Milwaukee, Biden says he's securing $15 billion in funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law for the work. Today, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the case of Oklahoma death row inmate Richard Glossop. Convicted in a 1997 murder, the state's attorney general and others say new evidence shows prosecutorial misconduct at his trial, arguing he should get a new one. The Supreme Court will now consider consider whether the state must carry out his execution. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. This was a season where Mets ownership and management admitted they weren't really going for it. They would try to compete and then spend money going into 2025. And they began the season 0-5, were later 11 games under 500, and yet here are the Mets. A win today, they'll be playing to win the pennant. Mets and Phillies, Game 3 at Citi Field, and the Mets twice went over the wall in right.
First pitch on the way, and high in the air to right field, pretty deep. Castellanos back at the track, at the wall, it is gone! He hit it off the facing of the second deck, the Coca-Cola corner. Another opposite field home run for Pete Alonso.
2-1. Winker hits a high drive, right field, toward the pole. It is gone! Second deck shot, Jesse Winker.
The calls on WHSQ. Mets went on to win 7-2. 7 strong innings from Sean Manaea. They lead the series 2-1. Game 4, also a 5 o'clock start. In San Diego, the Padres put up 6 runs in the second inning. The Dodgers came back with 4 in the third to make it 6-5. No scoring after that. And the Padres are up 2-1. The Yankees look to go up 2-1 as they play Game 3 tonight in Kansas City. The Jets came home from the loss in London that dropped them to 2-3. Coach Robert Saleh met the media as usual on Monday, and then yesterday met with his coaches before a visit to owner Woody Johnson, who fired him, and Saleh was escorted out of the building, replaced by defense coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. Johnson's made a ton of coaching changes, but this was his first in-season change, and worth noting, only once in the last 62 years has the team gone to the playoffs after making an in-season change. WNBA, Minnesota beat Connecticut 88-77, so it's the Lynx who will face the Liberty in the finals starting tomorrow in Brooklyn. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. The Bloomberg Sports Update brought to you by Audi. Visit your Tri-State Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. It could be one of the most significant antitrust actions against a big tech company in decades. The Justice Department is considering asking a federal judge to order Google to sell off parts of its business. And for more, we're joined by Bloomberg News executive editor Peter Elstrom. Peter, good morning. So what is it exactly that the Justice Department is considering here?
So what we're seeing now is that the Justice Department is proposing potential solutions to this antitrust case that they have been waging against Google. Back in August, the judge in this case, Amit Mehta, ruled that Google indeed did have a monopoly in search, and it had abused its power in the search business. And so the Justice Department presented this 32-page document where they laid out a framework of potential solutions that could now be used to address those concerns. They include some structural changes and also some behavioral changes. Perhaps the most dramatic option here is that they're proposing the judge should order a breakup of Google.
That is certainly a dramatic possibility. I mean, it would be a pretty significant development, one of the biggest since the effort to break up Microsoft, right?
Right. Of course, the effort to break up Microsoft did not result in a breakup of Microsoft. It did result in Microsoft having to pull back from some of the potential acquisitions and investments that perhaps they would have done. But at that time, the U.S. government was seeking to separate perhaps the operating system or the Windows operating system or the Office franchise from Microsoft. In this case, what the Justice Department is floating is perhaps separating out some of the different businesses of Google that it has been using to supplement that search business. Search has always been the most profitable business at Google, generates tremendous amounts of advertising profits for the company, but it also uses some of its ancillary businesses to build up search. That includes Chrome, the browser, where people often go to find different things. You can use that to search directly. That can funnel people to search. You've also got the Android operating system, which is the most popular mobile operating system that also often uses its technology to direct people to Google search. And then on top of that, what we found out during the case is that Google Alphabet pays billions of dollars to different companies to use Google search, including Apple. Apple's one of the big beneficiaries. So on iPhones, you get directed to Google search too.
And it seems like a lot of this pressure has really ramped up with the rise of artificial intelligence alongside it, and how that's improved and increased the capabilities of that search function. How does artificial intelligence play into this antitrust scrutiny?
I think Apple and AI has been a threat more broadly to several different businesses, including Google's search business. There was discussion shortly after OpenAI introduced ChatGPT that perhaps people wouldn't have to search anymore. Instead of going to Google, getting that list of potential links, and then clicking through them, you just go to ChatGPT, you'd ask a question, you get an answer instead of a bunch of links. So that was clearly viewed as a threat to Google's business. Since then, Google has accelerated its own AI efforts to try to catch up to some of the things that OpenAI had put into the market. Google is very advanced. They had done a ton of research in AI already, but they hadn't put some of those services into the market at this point. Now they're getting more aggressive through Gemini and some of their other products and using AI, but that is one of the big potential prizes in the future. And I think one of the concerns at the Justice Department and the FTC also is that the big tech companies are going to use their existing monopolies of their existing franchises to capitalize on AI, which is really the big prize in the future.
So this report's just come out, these potential remedies. Is there any way to tell at this point where the judge might lean in terms of the kind of remedies that he could seek in this case?
We really don't know that. What we got most recently is this 32-page document where the Justice Department is laying out potential remedies that it sees in the case. Google immediately weighed in. They said these were radical proposals, said they would have unintended consequences. At one point, they said that a breakup would actually break the company. Which is a bit surprising. And we have quite a few months to go. There's going to be a hearing early next year where lawyers on both sides are going to be able to make their case in front of Amit Mehta, the judge, and then the expected target for a decision would be fairly late next year, roughly in August. So there are many months. There's a lot of arguments that are going to go into this. Again, if you look at historical precedent, Microsoft ultimately they decided that behavioral changes were more important than structural changes. That could be the case here too. Alternatively, they'd have to figure out how you would separate what's a very integrated company at this point and do it without causing unintended harm to consumers.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.